G'day everyone, welcome back to the Talking Leadership podcast. Thank you for joining us again. By way of introduction, today's guest is the Head of Supply Chain and Quality Systems at GroundProbe. Can I welcome Neil Cordon to the podcast? How are you, mate?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Eric. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I really appreciate it. It's hallowed ground now. This is with that many podcasts under your belt. It's very privileged to be asked for my opinion.
Mate, I appreciate it. It's feedback's always well received. Don't know about hallowed ground, but it's been an interesting pathway. And we met through the podcasting discussions that we had through the Best Practice Network. I'd like to say g'day to everyone from the network who might be listening in to the podcast. I hope all of you are listening in at some point. The guests that we have are often sharing very unique insights into leadership and well worth a listen. So Neil, again, thank you for joining us. Your leadership and its beginnings, can we have a bit of a sense of where that kicked off for you, mate?
Yeah, it's I've got 32 years of experience so far in working, and 15 years of that in management, or called management leadership. I'm not sure if they're the same thing or not, but I sort of class them as such. I probably wouldn't consider myself as being a leader at the stage when I was made a manager 15 years ago, but I'd certainly say the last 10 years of my time in management, I'd consider myself a leader. My background is in quality engineering and process improvement, and starting with sort of 10 years component manufacturing in the UK, and then moving into 12 years of automotive tier one supply in the UK, and then transitioning across to Australia in 2004. I did a stint as a quality and safety manager for a couple of years, and then I did some lean training with Peter Hines from SA Partners, who some people on the call might know, which was fantastic insight and really sort of lit my enthusiasm for continuous improvement. And that enabled me to move into a role as a CI manager for 2 years and help to set up an international system from scratch for continuous improvement. And I'm now 7 years into my tenure at GroundProbe, where I've done 4 different jobs so far. And I sort of group that in terms of being responsible for helping the company transition its systems and processes from its roots as a technology startup to kind of where we are now, which is a key part of Orica's technology development arm. So it's a fairly senior role, and I've certainly felt that my grasp on the concepts of leadership have improved a lot in the last 7 years at GroundProbe. It's been an amazing opportunity to develop my own skills.
I would guess you've met a lot of leaders as well as trying to develop your own leadership style. And like you said, that takes time to do. I think time is the critical factor there. I'm not suggesting by any stretch that people can't learn the craft of being a leader very quickly, but I think experiences happen over certain time periods, and you need that to progress yourself. So again, drawing on that experience, if we can, mate, defining leadership, how do you define the concept?
I'd say I'll give you a definition as I see it now. I probably would have said many different things over the years. In fact, when I first started in management and sort of leadership, I wouldn't have had the first clue how to define it. It was very much around task-based sort of management when I first started. But now looking back from the opposite end of that experience chain, I'd say that the primary thing is to grow great people, is to develop capability in your team and ultimately put yourself out of a job. That is kind of how I would say that's the kind of prime directive for me as a leader, is to grow good people. That's the job. And then all the rest of those things are a byproduct, is actually achieving the goals of the team. They're kind of a byproduct. Is that the real joy for me is in setting direction and vision and helping define the why, and then kind of supporting the team to be able to grow. So maintaining motivation, creating a safe psychological space where people can be themselves without any fear of judgment, without any fear of failure. They can make mistakes, allow them to take risks. I'd say it's got elements of parenthood in it. Certainly, as I've got older and I've got to the stage where I've got grown-up kids and grandkids, I certainly can see the parallels between parenthood and being a really good leader. Nurturing the team, teaching fairness and discipline where needed, teaching them how to fish, constantly putting people at the heart of what you do, and to try and get that win-win outcome for the team and the individuals, but also for the business, to maintain that forward motion and career of the team, but also achieve the team goals. For me, I've always tried to stay in coaching mode. My history, if I look back on it now, is I often would go into directive mode because I thought everyone was looking to me for answers. And that's kind of a wrong turn for me. I kind of learned that through hard-won experiences, that your job isn't to dispense answers. Your job is to ask, what do you think? But listen to what people say and help coach them to understand logical reasoning, that kind of thing, critical thinking. But setting clear standards of work behaviour, modelling the values that you hold dear, that the company holds dear, setting clear purpose and vision, remaining consistent and dependable for the team, so that you know that they know that you'll always throw them a lifeline if the water gets too deep for them, but they feel confident to swim. Being there for the advocate for your team, being the main cheerleader for the team, and walking alongside them, not necessarily ahead of them or behind them, pushing them, shielding them from unnecessary stresses. I think that's a key component of leadership. Is often when you're in a higher position, there's a lot of things that happen above you that, if you carried all of that communication through to your team, would cause them unnecessary stress. I think there's a degree of shielding your team from the unnecessary elements of the senior management stuff. But yeah, to be a shameless promoter of the team and nurture people to deliver great people is what I see the role of leadership to be.
Yeah, appreciate that. That's quite a comprehensive definition. And by the sounds of it, it's sort of obviously changed over your time in different roles. I'm finding that it's a typical response from the people, at least that I've had some of these conversations with. I wonder though, and if we can unpack what you just spoke about there before we get on to the next topic area, that as you've come up in the leadership game, and you're not the first, and I don't think you'll be the last to make connections between parenting as a way to compare that role and the leadership role, is having the judgment to know when to cut the umbilical cord and let people make mistakes versus shielding them from the worst of what might come up. And I get the motivation to do that, because you want to protect your team and you want your team to be as high functioning and functional as it can possibly be. But I would come at it a little different, and my thinking would be let them take a few lumps and bumps, because complete blanket protection is like helicopter parenting. It works for a while. Dealing with some of the slings and arrows of being in a position in a team is something people need to experience. Would you agree, disagree? What would your view on that be, mate?
Yeah, I'd say it really does depend on the people in your team. There's no wrong and right answers to any of this stuff. I think, to me, the right answer is that you've got to look at your individuals in your team and understand the strengths and weaknesses of each individual and what support they need. And in some cases, you'll have A performers that really don't need much support at all. And actually, you can get them to help you coach other people. And then you've got people at the other end of the spectrum who might be anti-establishment, anti-management, who can contaminate the team. So there's all spectrums of human behavior within that. So I think there's no black and white answer to that. I think, yeah, cutting the umbilical cord, certainly if you've got somebody you feel is nervous to make mistakes, like the kid with the bike with the training wheels on, you take the training wheels off and you let them fall off a couple of times, and the next thing you know, they're riding without the training wheels.
I get what you mean. You bring up a good point, and I've often, to my detriment, not followed up when this point is brought up in conversation, that you're dealing with human beings. And do you think in the role you've got now, but in similar roles you've had in the past, that as you're on the come up, the amount of work to do with human beings exponentially grows, and there's a difficulty that's unique to some leadership roles, in that the majority of the time you're dealing with human resource, human being issues, and not the operational stuff? And how much of a brain twisting, gut punching thing is it to try and manage the workload from the people stuff to the operational stuff, because you still have to achieve certain things in that role as well, because you have higher ups to account to. So how do you find the balance there? Is there a balance?
Yeah, again, I think it depends on the individuals in your team. If I look back on the various teams that I've managed over the years, I think, when it's taken me a long time to get to the stage that I'm at now, but I'm really, really confident in the team that I've got. They're an awesome bunch of people, and there's, most of my time is spent on people now. It's mostly spent on development of people. I don't have to worry necessarily about the business outcomes, because the team is so good and we've got to a really good stage, there's more time on people. When the team is underperforming, ironically, you probably get less time to spend on the people, because you're more focused on the fact that the outcomes aren't being delivered and you're more transactional. So I think it's a hard battle actually to get, depending on the individuals, it's a hard battle to get to a really well-functioning team of people where you can focus more on them and the development of their careers, and giving them opportunity and creating ability for them to give more input to the business than the opposite end of the extreme, which is where, there's a lot of issues with the people, but you don't get time to spend with the people because you're too busy dealing with the outcomes of not having a high performing team. I don't know if that answers the question, but
that very much. I always find it interesting in speaking to different leaders on in this particular forum that you work in different industry sectors, and in the industry sector that you work in, there will be some unique issues that you've got to deal with, and the fact that you've potentially got to service clients is another layer of complication on top of that. And I look, more power to you. I think finding that balancing point and keeping your own mental health in check and making sure you're not overstressed it's an art form.
If I could go back and sort of tell the younger me, give myself some tips, I would definitely sort of say that if things aren't being delivered and it's the people issues, is you need to carve out the time to deal with that. Dealing with poor performance in particular is really, really, really important, and something that I haven't historically done that well. I've definitely learned how to do it better. But I think, not actually making time for the team when things aren't going so well is actually detrimental to your, as you say, your own stress levels and your own mental health, and it takes a very long time to get out of that situation if you don't devote the time. I listened to some podcasts with a friend of mine did this podcast ages ago, and he said, if you're in that situation, you've got to carve out at least an hour a week just to focus on the team, just to take yourself out of the transactional, think about the people, make a list of everyone on your team, make a list of the ups and downs and the pluses and minuses, and work out what it is you're actually going to proactively do to get out of that situation. If you don't make that time, you're constantly paddling against the tide. And I think that can be really, really hard and very stressful, and it goes on for a long, long time. So sometimes you've got to bite the bullet as well with poor performance, and you have to, no one wants to put somebody on a performance improvement plan. But sometimes that is the appropriate thing to do, and it's only fair to them as an individual as well, because to me that means that there's a mismatch there somewhere between the role that they're in and what you're expecting of them. So it's not necessarily about the individual. Sometimes it is, but not very, very rarely, I would say. More often than not, it's a mismatch between that person's capabilities and the role that they're in, and maybe there's something you could do to set them up for success instead of performance improve and manage them out. So yeah, I think that side of things is very difficult to get out of if you don't devote the time to it. So I think that would be my top tip for anybody who's coming through that sort of pipeline at the moment. If you've got a team of 15 or 20 people, and you've got a couple of people in there who are struggling, got some problems, and they're creating some issues for you, is to spend time on those people, whether that be, set them up for success if you can. But if they're affecting the team, some of the early feedback I got from the rest of the team was they felt that there was a mismatch in the standards of performance that was accepted. So if you accept poor performance, everyone who's really working hard looks at those individuals and says, well, if they're getting away with it, why am I trying so hard? So that can contaminate the pool. Every one of these things is contextual, and there's such a diverse range of things that could be happening with individuals, their personal lives, their jobs, the fit for their jobs, the actual business itself, and the success or failure of the business, the pressure that you're under individual work circumstances. And I think that's why there's such a diverse range of opinions when you do these leadership podcasts, is because it's like baking a cake. There's so many different ways to do it to get to the same outcome.
Couple of things to pick up on. Thank you for answering one of my later questions about looking back on your leadership pathway. So we'll get back to that one a bit later. But I think one of the things that comes out quite strongly, and I'm in your camp definitely with this, is performance management of whether they're team members or contractors is a difficult conversation, because you don't want to put pressure and or make people feel like crap. But at the end of the day, things need to be delivered, and there are responsibilities beyond yourself and the team member, and that's the viability of the business. And so this idea of having difficult conversations, nobody likes doing it, but you have to do it. And I definitely think there are better ways to have those conversations than tearing strips through someone, depending on the leader, potentially not reverting back to the blame game, as opposed to trying to tease out where better performance needs to be managed, and whatever that planning process is to get that to happen is necessarily a difficult conversation, because something has gone wrong, and identifying what that is can be multi-layered. It may be something outside a team member, and you just brought up a perfect example. If team members are feeling that there's a different standard for people, and the person you're trying to performance manage has that idea that the standards are not the same for everyone, and they're in effect rebelling against the powers that be, that there's some difficult conversations there. And that may be a reflection of the leader not setting the same bar for everyone, that the same level of accountability for everyone. That, to be fair, that is something that is an iterative process, because sometimes that will need to change, and you've got to have the communication chops to be able to tell people where that's changed and why there's a change there. So it gets a bit murky in some senses, but you've got to have the conversation. And so my question to you would be, do you find it personally difficult to have those difficult conversations, or is it something that has become easier over time?
It has become easier over time with experience. I hate that. It's the worst part of the job, and it's the part that, everyone likes to talk about success and all the positive sides of leadership, but the reality is that some parts of it really suck. And those parts in particular, where you've got to sit somebody down and do disciplinary. And I've kind of learned to distance myself from that and think this is not personal. It's not about me. You've got to look at whether the person is a good fit for the role. Is there something I could have done differently? And once you get to the point where you realize there's nothing you could have done differently, and you've done all the right things to support the person, then you've got to basically help them with a transition to find another role or whatever it is that you need to do. So you've got to do your best for them. But then there's a point where you step off and you say, I've done what I could do. I like the parent thing. I'm a responsible parent at this stage. Sometimes you've got to rip the sticking plaster off. For me as well, I've sort of learned how to spot some of the hallmarks of when you're banging your head against a wall. One of those top tips I'd sort of say there is when you do performance evaluations, like formal performance evaluations, the people that are the most difficult to resolve those difficult conversations are the ones where you really need to focus on the performance issues. Are the ones who really score themselves very highly, but you score them very low. They've got a lack of self-awareness of the fact that they're actually not performing. They think they're doing a great job, and you think they're doing a terrible job. That's I've found that to be a common pattern, is that people who really aren't doing a great job, who are underperforming in a really bad way, and you just think they need to be dealt with, are the ones who rate themselves most highly in the role that they're in. And that pattern's held true all the way through. And that's for me, this is where I need to spend my time, because you can't have that. And if you can't get that clarity of understanding, and it often comes with a lack of self-awareness on the part of the individual. They just are not self-aware of the fact that there is a standard that needs to be set, and they're nowhere close to it. So yeah, I hate those conversations. Everyone, I think, hates those conversations. Some people just seem to breeze through that. I actually still go through a bit of personal agony prior to those things. Lose sleep the night before, that kind of thing. Which is probably not healthy. It's got better over time the more you do it, but it's never an easy thing. It's never a pleasant thing. But
No.
all you got to do is make sure you've done everything you can do. And then if that's the case, then you've got to help that person understand that this is not fair on them. It's just too hard for them. It's not a pleasant situation for them to be in, and make the transition as quick as you can.
Be more common than you think, mate. I think nobody wants to deliver bad news, or the ultimate being a decision that the person's going to be let go, and that's another level of angst as well, because you don't want to cost someone their livelihood, but unfortunately sometimes there's problems with fit, there's problems with commitment, or all that stuff that needs to be dealt with. I haven't had the experience you've had in a organization where potentially you might have even a HR step in to help with that process. And I don't know a lot about the HR function in medium to larger organizations. So I've tended to work in smaller advocacy businesses or government. And so it's not an area that I'm terribly familiar with, but from what I do understand of it, there's some difficulties there. And there's just another layer of accountability for the leader, particularly if you have to manage through a process that is a difficult one. And thank you for having this part of the chat with me, because it leads into the next topic area, which is this idea. And it's not my idea, and I did coin the phrase, but I use it for the purposes of our discussion, obviously, is this idea of a lonely road of leadership. Is it really a lonely pathway, or is it as lonely as you make it, Neil?
I think it's that same answer. It depends on the team. I think it can be, certainly. There's elements of it where you have to create a distance between yourself and your team members. Arm's length has always been difficult to do for me. I'm a very affiliative person. I like to participative, affiliative, that's kind of my style. And I think that works really well when you've got a really good team and there's a really good dynamic. You can be friends and you can be, work colleagues, and it works really well. But if you've got, lack of performance or some other issues going on there's got to be a distance. And I've certainly, in the past become a little bit unstuck with that, with being too friendly with people that there's performance issues with, and then it makes those awkward conversations almost impossible, extremely stressful, because you've then got a conflict between your personal relationship with that person and the work relationship. So in that respect, I think you've always got to maintain some sort of professional distance. You got to keep a lookout for people that are taking advantage when you do extend that sort of participative, affiliative style, to make sure that there are people who will see that in your management style, who will take advantage of that. And I think as you get more advanced in your career, you tend to be able to spot those people more readily. But I think the most important thing for me is to remain authentic. You don't have to be arrogant to be a leader. You can't always expect to be liked. There's a certain element in there, but you must remain authentic to yourself. So for me, I'll always be open and friendly with people. And I do still find it difficult to maintain that sort of arm's length relationship with people. At the moment, for me, it's not a problem because I've got a really good team. Everyone gets on really well. We're a great bunch of people. So it's just like, I'm just one of the team and we'll get on well. So at this point in time, I would say, the leadership thing isn't a lonely thing for me. In the past, certainly has been. When I found myself it's difficult to have friends at work sometimes when you've got to be in that sort of awkward conversation situation. So, but I'd say there's never that moment when you can walk past poor performance regardless of who it is. And if you walk past that, you condone it. So you've got to maintain that authenticity and the standard, and that in itself can separate you from your team.
Trying to keep a professional distance in a team is difficult, particularly if it's a high-performing small team, because you're part of that cog, you're part of that system. There's nothing stopping you being friendly and being collegiate and trying to get the best out of people. And having a laugh is an important part of any time at work, because you're there for a long time. But that, again, I'm talking about leadership as an art form. Finding what the sweet spot there is, take some time, and you'll obviously make mistakes. I find it interesting, and this could be a topic for a whole nother series of podcasts, and I might actually do this idea that leaders feel they need to be liked. I fell into that thinking many years ago, and once had a few more years under my belt and lived some life and experienced some things that you experience with family and having kids and living some life, that I really don't give a crap whether people like me or not. I just want to be a professional person, and whether you like me or not, there's some benefits to that, but I want to deal with people on a professional level. And this comes from a person who hasn't had your experience dealing with teams. So I come at it from a slightly different angle, and it's a spectrum. I think there's no right way to do that, but I have worked for people that completely isolate themselves from the team, and they are a figurehead of sorts, and but they do have the skills to do the people stuff.
I'd say come back to my parenting analogy. It's exactly the same thing as being a parent. You want to inspire your kids, you want to inspire your team, you want people to look to you for leadership, behavioural cues, that kind of thing. But sometimes you have to be the bad cop, and sometimes you have to say no, and it's never pleasant telling your kids they can't have something they don't want. And I look at it in terms of that. I don't want to be liked necessarily. Everyone wants to be liked. I don't want to be liked. I want people to see me as somebody that can inspire confidence that I'm going to do the right thing regardless of what it is. And the right thing sometimes might be to say, I'm sorry, but no, you can't do that, or that's not acceptable. And people would respect that. That's what I strive for, is that people respect me regardless, because they know that whatever I'm doing is the right thing. And if they see that I'm telling them no, then they respect that and go, oh, I must have stepped over a line there somewhere. Which is how you would sort of see parenting. So I'm coming back to my parenting analogy on that one.
Yeah, I can't disagree. Measuring success, Neil, it can happen in lots of different ways. So as a leader, what's your measures for success? So
I've got a few things thinking about here. We do some formal measurement of this stuff in terms of net promoter score, which is a system of measuring sort of satisfaction, if you like. We use that for our customers. We also use that for our employees. And my team's currently sitting at a net promoter score of 50%, which is actually really good. It's probably world class. I mean, it's more than half of the team, or about half the team, would actively promote working within this team to friends and family, that kind of thing. 50% sounds quite low, but actually on the scale of things, the way it's measured is that's a really good score. So there's a a 2 decimal points measurement system, but then there's the other non-tangible stuff, which is for me a happy team. I got a little anecdote there on that, is that I arrived at work the other day feeling a bit kind of down. We've got a lot of things going on, and I'm thinking I'm about a 2 out of 10 in terms of like my personal motivation today. I'm struggling, and I've got to not show that to people. And one of we'd sort of borrowed somebody from another team, and they'd come and joined our team, and I was beating myself up about all the things that were not doing well. And this guy came up to me and he said, I just want to let you know that I've only been on your team for a couple of weeks. I think it's the best team I've ever worked on. I've never been anywhere that's so safety focused, where that people's ideas are listened to. Never in my working life have I come across that. And I just want to let you know, I think it's an awesome team, and I wish I could stay on your team. And that to me was a real measure of success. That although I was beating myself up about all the tiny little things that maybe weren't going that well today, somebody had come into our environment and said, this is the best he's ever seen. That to me was a really clear measure of actually the culture that we built. And although I'm reflecting on the 2 negatives, he's looking at the 100 positives. I think delivering results with a minimal stress, that's one thing I'd say. Things running smoothly, good processes, and processes that evolve with lots of input from the team and a vibe of creativity. That's certainly at GroundProbe. That's one of the things that is palpable in the air. Everything's changing all the time because everyone's always contributing these little tweaks here and there that improve the day. And just you go home knowing that tomorrow's going to be easier than it was today because everyone's contributed to tuning up the machinery that makes it work, which is a fantastic climate. So to me, that's the success really, is to see a really creative team with a vibe of creativity in the air, where people are excited to come to work because they know that if something gets in their way, it's an opportunity. And I know that sounds like a kind of cliche, that it's an opportunity, not a problem, but people genuinely on my team would say, what can we do about that? That's kind of like, oh, yeah, something went wrong. What can we do about it? It's almost an excitement to come across something that doesn't run smoothly. So for me, that is, so we've got, net promoter score 50%, but I think that comes from having that climate that everyone's contributing.
And that score, was for your team or for the organization?
The organization's actually got a 50% score. I haven't actually seen this year's result for my team, but it was 50% on my team last year, and the overall organization's got 50%. So I'm not quite sure whether my team actually improved since last year. 50% net promoter score is a really good score. If your customers are giving you 50%, you're doing brilliantly. But if your internal team are giving you 50%, then they always say if your employees are happy, your customers will be happy. So it kind of reflects, because we've got the same score, internal and external. So for me, that feels like we've got the recipe just right. And I know that because of the constant input from the team and the vibe of creativity, that it can only get better from here. It's not going to roll backwards. So to me, that feels great, because it means that I can step back and actually look at what's taking place, and I know that whether I'm there or not, there's going to be improvement. It's not me driving it anymore. It's self-propelled.
The fact that you're measuring it and trying to understand what that looks like in your own business context is, something to be proud of, particularly if you're getting multiple ratings from different sources, so internal, external. That gives you a good what would you call it? Get the finger on the pulse as to what's happening within the business, and that's a good thing. Neil, we touched on this in the podcast that we did in that panel session with the Best Practice Network, and I'd like to come back to it because we might be able to go into a bit of a deeper dive here. What do you think for you are the core leader capabilities that a leader needs to be effective?
I think being people focused and understanding what that means is one of the key things, is understanding people. I think if you've got a good sort of empathy with humans, and you understand, maybe a bit of the psychology of people and why people do things the way they do things, and I've done a course on mental health first aid as well. That really helped me understand, some of the things when people are having problems, how to spot those things. So being able to read people, I think, is one of the most important things, but also being able to switch to different management styles depending on context. So, one of the things we do is we do like a 360-degree review, that kind of thing, and we assess ourselves against the 6 different styles. So this is I like measurements and stuff like that. So there's the soft and fluffy stuff, but there's also the measurement side of things. So we look at directive, visionary, affiliative, participative, pace setting and coaching as 6 different styles, and we measure. The team gives you feedback on, not specifically those words, but they give you feedback on your style, and it pigeonholes those things. And to be able to demonstrate that you've got a really good balance of styles, and you can switch between the different types of, when you need to be directive, tell somebody no, tell somebody specifically do something, versus the need to set a vision, that kind of thing. I think the ability to understand the nuances of all those different styles of management and to be able to switch is something that you kind of learn it as you go intuitively, but when somebody measures you against it and tells you what it is, you go, oh wow, I do that okay. Looking back over the years, no one ever measured me and told me I was doing that stuff, but I was doing it. And it's only now I've actually been measured against that, and I look at my dominant styles versus my less dominant styles. I think I've actually got a good recipe there. The results are pretty good. So I think, understanding people, but understanding yourself and being your own sort of self-aware, not critic's probably the wrong word, because I've been too critical of myself over things, but to be self-aware as an individual. You see the worst of the managers I've ever had are the people who've got no self-awareness at all. Emotional intelligence, that's a critical one. And again, some of the worst managers I've ever had have got very low emotional intelligence, which is that same thing. It's that human connection. Because essentially when you're leading, it's about humans, and it's about developing people and motivating people. And you can't do that if you don't understand people, and you can't do that if you don't have high self-awareness and emotional intelligence. So to me, it's the less sort of tangible, measurable stuff. But on the measurable side, there are sort of different styles that are definitely to be able to understand those and develop capabilities to express a vision. They're useful tools in the toolkit to know when to switch from one style to another.
Yeah, you mentioned this idea of having a capabilities toolkit that's come up quite a bit as well, and I can't find a better phrasing for it, but yeah, it's your battle kit ready for different things depending on the situation. And again, you're not going to know every different method or every different approach, but being aware that different approaches exist or different ways of operating in your leadership role is quite a necessity, I guess. And that we come back to this idea that you build these things over time, because you're going to try some things that work and some things that won't work. And that, I guess, that's to be expected. If you're going to be better at the craft, you're not going to have the answer all the time up front to get the most optimal outcome. And I've often thought, when you get exposed to different models, well, which of these would actually work in the real world? And is it about making it known to yourself that there are different approaches, and you take the bits that you think will work best for you? And so it's not just a dogged application of one mode of thinking, it's grabbing the best of what's available and making it work for you. I think the pragmatic side of things is something that I think most really good leaders do very well, that they're not bogged down in one approach, because I don't think that's practical or a real skill in the current workplace. And as much as I wanted to avoid discussing COVID, I guess the way our businesses are shaped now, different leadership capabilities or building different capabilities is going to come more to the fore now, because we are working in very different ways.
Yeah, I think it's the most important thing. I mean, I've been through lots of these different kind of leadership assessment things, like lifestyles inventory, that kind of thing, where they talk about blue, green, and red behaviors, and you can get sidetracked by those things by trying to modify. I mean, sometimes you've got to modify your approach, but I think the thing that's come out of all of those for me is a clear sense of self. Who am I? What am I about? What type of leader am I? And if the type of leader I am isn't necessarily effective in delivering what have I got to change to make that so? But again, they're all just tools in a toolkit. You can get obsessed about these kind of like tools and measurements and things, but I think you have to have a clear sense of self, and that's when I talk about self-awareness. You understand what kind of a person am I, so that you're not flippy floppy when people are looking to you for guidance. They're not seeing you suddenly change your behaviors because you went on a course, and all of a sudden you start presenting yourself in a different light, because then it doesn't come across as being authentic. It's like, well, what course has this guy been on now? He's suddenly using different language and conducting himself in a different way. So I think for me, looking back, it's that don't try and modify yourself too much based on some latest course that you've been on or some assessment model. Just have a clear sense of self and understanding that context is everything in this game of leadership. You need to understand when to use individual tools, and don't sort of force this image of yourself out there that's you're trying to be Richard Branson or Elon Musk or something. You are who you are, and you have to apply yourself to the context that you're in to get the best result. But don't sort of force an image of what a leader should be into your psyche, and then people look at you and think you're faking it.
Yeah, no, you don't. You definitely don't want that. Let me ask the following. Now, we did talk about this in a previous podcast, and maybe this is not maybe. This is an opportunity to dig a little deeper. The nature versus nurture question. Are leaders born or are they made?
Cool. That was a difficult one. I remember talking about this before. I think, again, I think there's elements of both. I think there's a certain level of, as I said, the emotional intelligence and self-awareness that comes from your own level of EQ that you've got. That is an essential part of that. And if you don't have that, I think it's very difficult to be an effective leader. And some of those things you just can't learn. So there's elements of nature in there, but there's certainly elements of nurture. You have people coach you as you go through your working career. You have rough experiences. And as I say, if I look back and look at some of the things I've done in the past, if I was advising myself now, there's lots of things I've done that I wouldn't have done. So I've learned that through the nurture, the environment that I've been through, the coaches that have given me good tips. And as we've said before in previous podcasts, from watching people do a really shocking job of it and going, I'm never going to do that, because, I've been on a victim of that as well. And, you certainly never want to do those things to people. And I think those are things that you learn as you go. So I think in the general mix, I think there's some things in there that are non-negotiable, that are nature, that I don't think you'll have an effective leader if there's certain characteristics or traits as a human that you need. Everything else is nurture. It's experience and learning and education, and but you need to have that level of EQ and self-awareness to be able to do it. Otherwise, you can't learn everything from a book and be effective as a leader.
The other element to consider, get your views on this, is having the opportunity to apply your leadership. Then brings up this idea about leadership is a choice. You either choose to be a leader or you choose not to be a leader. And I've met some people that are nominally called leaders that should never have chosen a leadership pathway because they've got no EQ, they've got no idea of what empathy is, or they don't have an understanding of human interaction and what those dynamics look like. Even the niceties of walking into an office, and instead of expecting someone to grab you a coffee, that you bring in coffee for the team, or you do those little human being things that just stand you out as a decent human being, not someone's leader, not the head of the team, just the niceties of life. And I know this, for some that will be listening, they don't give a crap about this stuff, but I have to tell you from my experience, it's the people that did those little things on a regular basis that can make a workplace and a team feel that much better when people do the little things without being asked, and just get in and muck in and make someone else's day just that little bit better. I do recall on me starting to work, I was working in the public sector, and we had a team. He was a junior team leader, but he was the leader of at least 4 of us, and random things like coffee runs, sugary things at the times of day when you needed a sugar hit, was never asked, was never expected to do any of it. And it got to the point where then we all started rostering ourselves onto, you got the coffee tomorrow, you got the biscuits or the sugar hit we need. And not good for your overall health to be eating crap all the time, but it was something to bond the team. And I didn't really think about that stuff until many years after I'd left that area. And it was a way to distract people from the humdrum of your day, to be able to have a break, to have a coffee, or God forbid for those that smoked, you'd go outside and have a smoke together with that person or someone else. Just what would you call it? A part of the day that wasn't just about the work. And again, humanizing the workplace is a big deal, but some people don't give that any credence. And I think it's an important part of being, particularly in an office environment in which I've worked in many times, that the best office experiences and workplaces that I've had is where people did that just as a matter of being nice people, not doing it because their position description suggested that they should do.
Yeah, I almost think there's 2 groups, and it's probably not binary, but there's 2 groups of people in there. And they always say that people that want to be in charge shouldn't be allowed to be in charge by default. They're the people that probably, they've got this idea of what, being the leader is, and being in charge. It's not necessarily necessarily being the leader. And then there's the other people who are more humanistic, who understand that we're all just here to do a job. Let's just make it as pleasant as we can. Let's deliver as much opportunities for individuals. You know, all the humanistic stuff, buying donuts or whatever it is, all that good stuff. And they, like myself, I would say I probably fit into the second category, I hope.
Those that want to lead maybe shouldn't be leaders. You and Chris Morgan have made that fairly clear that they're the people you want to watch out for. That and I think what he meant, and I can't disagree with, is those that want positions of authority for the sake of having authority over people. They're the people that probably shouldn't be leaders, or at least should be mentored into different ways of thinking where that's concerned. And look, these people exist. I've met them in many walks of life. You can learn things from them too. I think it's always a good thing to have in your toolkit experiences with people that are just either shitty human beings or shitty leaders, because you get to learn things about what not to do, see situations. And I've seen this, and it made me feel completely uncomfortable, where someone's tearing strips over a team member in front of the other team members without it being a one-on-one conversation away from the workspace. There's nothing more toxic than thinking, if I get in trouble, I'm going to get my ass handed to me in a public forum. I think there's ways and means of doing things, and screaming and being unprofessional in front of someone's face is just not the way to go. If you're a loud, obnoxious person outside the workplace, all the best to you. But in the workplace, there's a level of professionalism that I think is just expected. It doesn't matter what level of leadership you are. You can't treat people a certain way, because it's just not the way things should be done. Have you met people like this that have done what I'm talking about, that have made that work environment just feel like crap? Not where you are now, but have you heard of or seen it yourself?
I've seen exactly the scenario you described. We used to have an operations manager back in the UK. I've got loads of good anecdotes about this particular individual, but his father was an ex-Marine, and I think his father used to thrash him on a regular basis, and he obviously had quite a rough childhood or something, because he used to bully people on a regular basis. And the guy was only like 5 foot tall, but he used to stalk around the place. And there was one particular occasion, every Friday morning we used to have a new product introduction meeting in this old conference room, and every week without fail, he obviously had it in his sort of strategy book, he would attack somebody publicly, and it would be a different person each week, and you could literally see him looking around the room trying to decide, who am I going to single out this week to annihilate them in front of everybody. And he thought that was the right way to set the standard of behavior, is to pick somebody who was doing something less than, you know, what he wanted, and embarrass them in front of everybody, so that no one would do that anymore. And he did this regularly. And then one time he picked this business unit manager guy, who was obviously, having seen this a lot of times, he thought, if this guy picks me, I'm going to tell him what I think of him. And he picked this guy, and he got up and he walked right up to him, and they stood like side by side, and this guy's 5 foot tall and this guy was 6 foot tall. So he's looking down at him, and he said to him, there's only one person in the world I would allow to speak to me that way, and that's my dad. And you're not my father, so don't ever speak to me that way again. It's so disrespectful. If you do, I'll walk out of the door straight away. And he did not know what to do, because he was a bully, and it changed, his whole MO changed after that, because that was the first time I think anybody ever called him out on that behavior. And he'd obviously been doing it for years in what he thought was a successful manner, because nobody had ever stood up to him and said, I'm sorry, mate, but no, that's not how it's done. And that guy was an absolute hero to me. Still is, because I think that is, if anybody, as you said, if somebody said that to me now with life experience, I would just go, I don't want to work for you if that's the way. In fact, I actually did that at one point in my career. I said, I don't want to work for you if this is how it's going to be. Do you want to press reset at this point, because this is not how it should be, and I'm not personally prepared to take that as a standard of leadership from somebody else. So, and I would certainly never do that to somebody. So
yeah, it's not good. I regret when I was younger, when I saw that I didn't have the nous to say something, even if it put my own job at jeopardy. But I think most people are protective of their jobs, so they don't want to get involved, or you think someone else is going to say something. And typically when I saw someone react, and it was very rarely, but on occasions, and this was in a shared lunchroom space, when something like that happened, it wasn't as formal as you were talking about. We were all sitting down, and someone decided to tear strips over a younger person in the room. It was one of the admin team leaders that was there, and she'd been there for years, and she knew the joint. This is the kind of person you wanted to get to know, because she knew the history of the place, and she happened to be one of the funniest ladies I'd ever met. And when this gentleman started tearing strips through this junior, she got up, and the tirade that came out of her mouth, it wasn't swearing. It was what he was doing was wrong. And I just sat there laughing and looking at this guy going, I don't think this person's ever had this conversation or someone throw this shit at him. And he did, obviously he did change immediately, but I think it had some impact on him going down the track, unless he's got no human feelings whatsoever. But yeah, look, I guess to wrap things up, one of the things that you're talking about there is managing in the workplace so that you don't create a toxic work culture. And I think it's easily done. And I think it's incumbent on leaders to step up and identify that poor behavior and do something about it. Now, the irony is you don't do that in the public or stupid way that the person you want to change has done, but you've got to stamp it out some way, because it just creates resentments. And the idea that any kind of behavior is tolerated will create toxic teams, and you don't want that, because the cost of trying to fix something like that over time becomes a lot more difficult, and it makes everybody's job that much more difficult, because if there is no standard at which someone's going to call someone out on their crap, then why work there?
I've certainly seen that as well. I've seen people leave GroundProbe and go to work at other organisations, and they've said what a terrible toxic organisation it is. And when I've sort of asked them about what is the difference, and they've said it's the leader, it's the person at the top. It starts there, and we always say it always rolls downhill, but when the leader starts with a culture of fear, and there's a fear of failure, and everyone starts then behaving in a different way. And I think, to me, failure is the best opportunity for growth, because it's the only time you really learn anything. You don't really learn much at all when you get it right all the time. You only learn something when you make a mistake. And I think you almost want to encourage people to, well, that's what we do. We encourage people to step outside of the normal and try things differently to see what happens. Certainly this whole thing around diversity in the workplace as well, creating this diversity of different opinions, and then a culture of listening to other people. So you can listen to other opinions and try things a different way. If people are living in fear because the leader sets that standard, no one tries anything different. They always just tread the same pathway. And you have a terrible culture, and you never grow, you never learn.
You'd wonder with some companies that, I don't know if they publish this regularly, but for bigger corporates that might publish their turnover percentages, that if the numbers are high, then is that because you've got a culture that's particularly not a great one? I don't know how often companies in their annual reports will publish turnover rates, but you'd have to think that a high turnover number means you've got unhappy people, or you're bringing people in that are trying to test out the waters of the culture. They don't like it and they piss off, and you tend to have to start recruiting again. But that's a whole...
Yeah, I say it's not always that. Sometimes it's due to the nature of the business and maybe whether the business is successful. But I think more often than not, you would find if there's a high turnover, you'd also find a poor leader at the top of there.
Potentially, and that's not a good thing either. Look, Neil, before we go, and you kind of answered this question before, but I'll ask it more formally, and if you want to add to it, please do. If you had a chance to go back to a younger version of yourself, what would you say to yourself about being a more effective leader?
Yeah, I thought about this one. I think I've got a few kind of things here. One would be, you have great intuition, follow your instincts, and don't be so hard on yourself. That'd be the number one thing I would say, because over the years I've done things that I thought were right as I've gone along, and they've generally turned out to be the right thing, and the outcomes have been good. And if I could go back and say, just have a bit more confidence in yourself, follow your instincts, you've got great intuition, and don't be self-aware, but don't be so hard on yourself. I'm constantly measuring myself against what I didn't achieve instead of what I did. And be your own supporter, and don't confuse confidence with arrogance. Have confidence in yourself, have confidence in your decisions and your intuition, and don't confuse that with arrogance. Because I always used to think, well, you can't put tickets on yourself and say, well, I've got this right, or I know what I'm doing, because you're just going to come across as being arrogant. And I think that was because I'd seen a lot of arrogance in senior leaders, and I thought, I don't want to be like that. But actually, there's a major difference between confidence and arrogance. So yeah, be your own supporter. Don't confuse confidence with arrogance. Set realistic targets and don't try and boil the ocean. That's my biggest failing, I would say, is that whenever I set about doing something, I want to get the nirvana, perfect world stuff, and my targets I've set for myself have always been, I wouldn't say unachievable, but probably a bit unrealistic. And the last one I said there would be, spend as much time as possible on your team. If you're lucky enough to have a team of people, spend as much time as you possibly can on them, and don't spend as much time on yourself and the task-based stuff. The more time you spend on your team and the development of your team and the recruitment of the right people, the easier your life will be as a leader and the better the results will be. And it's a great feeling when you get it right.
Mate, thank you for sharing your leadership pathway. Before we go, give us a bit of a sense of what GroundProbe does, if you can, please.
So GroundProbe is the world's leading supplier of sensors for mining safety. So we produce radars for measuring slope stability and lasers for measuring deformation in underground mines. So we save people's lives essentially using our world-class technology. Constantly keeps getting better. We're in 35 countries around the world and we're the market leader. And we're a key part of Orica's technology development arm. So as part of Orica's growth plan is to differentiate their explosives product with all of the cool technology that we can bring.
Neil, thank you for your time. For those listening, this has been Talking Leadership. We'll catch everyone on the next podcast.